ever worry about not being able to arrange for cooking gas? Or do you ever worry about a power cut spanning days? Do you ever worry about standing in a long queue just to get fuel? Hello, my name is Alice Francis and you're watching Unplugged TV India, and today we will know about how Sri Lanka has landed in this worst economic crisis. Well, two of India's neighborhoods are facing some extreme situations like these. One is Pakistan, which is facing economic and political crisis, and the other is an island nation, Sri Lanka, which is witnessing its worst economic crisis since its independence from Britain. Sri Lanka has declared a state of emergency, which it later revoked. As the situation is going from worse to bad, first let's be clear that Sri Lanka's economy completely relies on imported products. At present, Sri Lanka's government is running low of foreign currency and as a result has been unable to pay for essential imports such as fuel, food items and other essential goods. On the surface of the cause of Sri Lanka's current economic crisis can be attributed to economic mismanagement by successive governments and a string of ill-advised decisions such as banning the use of chemical fertilizers and tax cuts. No doubt Sri Lanka is a beautiful island. It was one of the top tourist destinations in the year 2018. Around 12 to 13% of Sri Lanka's economic runs on tourism. So how it landed here? President Rajapaksa during his 2019 election campaign months promised economic growth, and which was one of the way to achieve that was deep tax cuts. Unfortunately, in the year 2020, COVID-19 pandemic hit the globe and also affected Sri Lanka's major tourism sector. The economic crisis began little over 2 years ago, and during that time, Sri Lanka has exhausted over 70% of its foreign reserves and now is only left with $2 billion in foreign reserves, which is around 200 crores in Indian currencies. In addition, Sri Lanka also has a whopping $7 billion, almost 700 crore in debt due in 2022. And that is where the main problem lies. Sri Lanka's ever-growing debt and its over-reliance on China for money for investment into infrastructure projects for the island nation. Somewhere it had in the early 2000s, Sri Lanka adopted an infrastructure-centric growth model based on China's own growth model, hoping that it would be able to create jobs and usher prosperity for the island nation. Sri Lanka turned towards China for money to fund this infrastructure projects. As per reports, China has invested $12 billion, which is 1200 crore on Sri Lanka's infrastructure project from 2006 till 2019 and continues to fund infrastructure project like the Colombo Port City that is being built by a Chinese state-owned enterprise called China Communications Construction Company at the cost of 1.4 billion, which is 140 crore. Now that project is expected to complete in 2043. Meaning Sri Lanka is unlikely to get any revenue from the project for close to 2 decades. Now you may be surprised to know that even after completion, 43% of the reclaimed land will be leased to China for 99 years because Sri Lanka has no other way to finance it. Essentially, Sri Lanka has been caught in a vicious cycle of lending money from China, infrastructure projects and being unable to pay them back, resulting in Sri Lanka having to either give up control of the projects or take out other loans to pay, resulting in Sri Lanka having to either give up the control of the projects or take out other loans in order to pay China back. The most infamous case being that of the port of Hambantota. In the early 2010s, Sri Lanka's former president Mahinda Rajapaksa wanted to build a port in his home region of Hambantota, but requests for funds were rejecting numerous times by multiple entities due to the port not having commercial viability. Finally, the Chinese were the only party interested, perhaps due to the strategic location of the port. For the construction of the port, Rajapaksa sought over $1 billion, which is 100 crores in loans from China. However, he lost in the following elections in 2015, and the new government, in the effort to avoid paying back such a huge debt, decided on a debt for equity swap wherein the port and its surrounding 15,000 acres was leased to China for 99 years. Following this revelation, the international community began to wonder whether this was China's plan all along to fund a doomed infrastructure project using loans, employing a Chinese company and taking over strategic Sri Lankan infrastructure when the country could not pay back its loans. Sri Lanka's crippling foreign debt has led it to asking the IMF for bailouts 16 times in the last 50 years, second only to debt-ridden Pakistan that also borrows heavily from China. During this economic crisis, Sri Lanka has even appealed to China for debt restructuring or extension of a credit line so as to ease its burden somewhat, but China has not agreed to Sri Lanka's request. Now, experts believe there are two main reasons why China has not agreed to Sri Lanka's request. Firstly, because it sets a bad precedent for other nations that have borrowed money from China, and because it will associate China with failure because Sri Lanka's economic model was based on China's. China's investment into Sri Lanka date all the way back to the 1970s. During then, China used to provide Sri Lanka with outright grants, and in the 20,000 that relationships had upgraded to a commercial model that utilized interest-bearing loans and infrastructure-related foreign direct investment. During the administration of President Mahinda Rajapaksa, China invested into key infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka such as transport, energy and telecommunication projects. China was also deeply involved in the construction and finance of several key critical infrastructure projects like the coal-fired Narokolai power plant in 2006, the Hambantota port in 2007, the Matala International Airport in 2010, the Colombo International Container Terminal at the Colombo port in 2011, and the Lotus Tower in 2011 as well. Chinese investments in Sri Lanka skyrocketed after the Belt and Road Initiative that was announced in 2013. Between 2012 and 2018, Sri Lanka's external debt to China doubled from $2.2 billion, which is 220 crore, to $5 billion, which is 500 crores. Chinese investments into infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka has also resulted in an increase in the import of construction material, and Sri Lanka has heavily relied on these goods from China. So the rise of import of construction material and equipment coupled with a small base of Sri Lanka exports to China resulted in a very large trade deficit between the two countries. Now, Sri Lanka is not the only nation that has to deal with the bleak consequences of Chinese infrastructure investment into low return projects, resulting in a cycle of debt. 1 in 5 infrastructure projects in Africa are funded by China, and 1 in 3 are built by Chinese companies. More often than not, these projects are undertaken without appropriate studies on their socio-economic impact or even their commercial viability. One example of this is the Angola that is currently being crushed under multi-billion-dollar Chinese debt and repaying it with crude oil. Another glaring example of this is Kenya's railway to nowhere. The Kenya government realized that this rail project from the Mombasa to Nairobi would put it into enormous debt and thus decided to freeze the project. Now, speaking about the current situation of Sri Lanka, the country is facing the worst economic meltdown. High inflation rates have made it harder for Sri Lankans to buy daily necessities. The country has been experiencing 13-hour-long power cuts and people have to stand in line for hours for fuel. Now it is obvious that with the country's foreign reserves dwindling, the country will not be able to repay its foreign debt. The island's total debt is $64 billion. About 95% of all government revenues go towards debt repayment. Not to be missed, Chinese loans come at a much higher interest rate, which is 6.5% per annum, than those from the Asian Development Bank, which is around 2.5 to 3% annum. In March 2020, Colombo had imposed a broad import ban to save foreign currency needed to service its $51 billion foreign debts. Looking at these bleak statistics, it is no wonder that the Sri Lankan government chose to convert its debt into equity and hand over Hambantota port to China. Sri Lanka's crushing external debt is one of the main causes for its current economic crisis and has forced the country to repeatedly devalue its currency just to be able to buy food for its people. Thank you for watching Unplugged TV India. Hope you liked the video.